DevOps is not war. We're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about really conflict resolution. We're going to use war to figure that out. If my presenter tool would work, that would be awesome, but it's not, so that's cool. So full disclosure, again, first time doing this talk, first time using this MacBook to do a talk, first time using this presenter tool, and you all get to experience it. So this is truly, right, truly testing in production here. So let's see. Also, first time using Google Slides, which apparently will be my last time using Google Slides. No offense to Google. All right, so who I am. This is the slide where I try to convince you why I'm up here and why I should be up here. I work for SJ Technologies, as Chris mentioned. I write a newsletter called DevOps-ish. I read the news so you don't have to, particularly Hacker News. I don't read the comments still, even though I'm reading Hacker News daily. I'm a Cloud Native Computing Foundation ambassador, so all the Cloud Native Computing Foundation projects I know quite a bit about. I can help you with them if need be, which is great for SJ Technologies. And I'm also a opensource.com community moderator. I'm also a veteran, as Chris mentioned. There's nothing more confidence boosting than a picture of you sitting on a toilet pointing at a Cisco switch in your slides. My pants are on, if you notice, sorry. So I put this up here because veterans get a bad rap, and like, that was me much younger, 50 pounds ago. But I look like that, and I look like this. I'm still a person. Anyways, I know about war, though. I served from 1999 to 2000. What happened 2 years after I joined? 9/11. I'm an OEF and OIF veteran. I did not serve in Iraq or Afghanistan, but I was in those regions during their war times. Went to a lot of fun places, in other words. So today, we're going to talk about conflict resolution. We're going to use history as kind of a guide for that, though. Who has gone through some kind of transformation of their organization, DevOps, digital transformation, whatever buzzword you want to use, and has experienced conflict? Either with coworkers, with teams, with other parts of the silos you're trying to break down. Yeah, like most of the room has. So great. Thank you. There's a reason for that, and it's actually deeply rooted in history. So we're going to talk about Thucydides. Say it with me. Thucydides. Good. Now that we got that out of the way, we can all carry on. Actually, I'm done here. No, I'm kidding. Graham Allison, he did a lot of work with Thucydides data. And then Thucydides trap, what is it? Why should we care? So Thucydides, he's actually a big Greek statue. No, I'm kidding. Athenian historian and general, actually. He wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, which was interesting for the time because he actually used like cause and effect and real data as opposed to intervention from the gods, which at the time, 460 BC or BCE, was kind of novel, right? Like, oh, we went to war because of the gods, right? No, not at all. And this is Graham Allison. He's alive. He's been in defense policy since the 60s. He's actually most well known for his work on the Cuban Missile Crisis. He put out a book in 1971 talking about it, kind of that failing fast and figuring out how to do things right in the future so that we don't have almost a nuclear war ever again. He's been a member of the Secretary of Defense's Defense Policy Board since 1985. So he's served through multiple presidents, multiple different kinds of crises. What is Thucydides trap? Allison actually coined the term Thucydides trap. He read Thucydides, he studied Thucydides, he's a Harvard professor, his students are studying Thucydides, they're doing a lot of research on all the things Thucydides studied. How did I discover Allison Graham and Thucydides was through his book, Destined for War: Can America and China Escape Thucydides Trap? Great book, read it at your leisure. But there's some quotes up here that I think are important to read. Thucydides trap refers to the natural, inevitable discombobulation, there's your big word of the day, that occurs when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power. Well, that sounds familiar. Rising power, DevOps, ruling power, your security team, silos, networking, whoever. And this can happen in any sphere. And when he wrote that, I don't think he realized that it could happen in IT, it could happen in a kitchen in a restaurant. It can happen anywhere. When Graham Allison wrote Sphere, he was talking about geographies. Well, I'm talking about work centers. So, another interesting quote, over the past 500 years, in 16 cases of a major rising power threatening to displace a ruling power, 12 of those resulted in war. Every conflict's listed in chronological order up there. 4 peace signs, 12 explosion signs. Now, you could say the Cold War was maybe an explosion sign. The 2 conflicting parties, the USSR and the United States, did not ever end up in war because we're all still here. The 4 cases that avoided this outcome, war, did so only because of huge, painful adjustments in attitudes and actions on the part of the challenger and the challenged alike. And I'll get more into exactly how that worked out in a specific example recently in historical terms. So, let's bridge the gap here. All right, Thucydides' trap. Does anyone have any questions about Thucydides' trap? Like, it's important to note that rising powers and established powers are going to come into conflict at some point. It's a question of how they handle it. Any questions there? Good. You're either all glazed over or it's too early yet. So Dev and Ops are closer than ever. I think we can all agree to that in some extent. They should be closer than ever, at least. Fear. Why that's important to note here. Psychological safety. It's great that I came on after Alex because it's literally part of what I'm talking about here. And then that specific use case, or historical case, UK versus US in the early 20th century, pre-World War I. So, Dev and Ops, holding hands, singing songs together, making s'mores by the campfire, right? No? Okay, fine. I try to make that happen at SJ with our clients, but it's hard, right? They're doing code, they're trying to do things and break things and go fast, and Ops is trying to keep things stable, and Ops gets yelled at when things break, and developers don't. It's not fair. But DevOps tries to bring that together, and that's why we're all here, to learn how to do this better. The divide is closing, I think it's safe to say at this point. At this point, I think the outliers that remain, aka not Silicon Valley, are the hard cases where you have established companies, 10, 20, 30, 40, or older companies that are trying to move faster because they're about to get their teeth kicked in by a startup, essentially. Look at Ford, GM, Chrysler. I'm from Detroit, so looking at Tesla and how they've treated Tesla, you can kind of see that rising power trying to beat back that, being beaten back by the established power. But to give you an idea of how far DevOps and Agile have come, this is a call out for an Agile DevOps program establishment for U.S. Strategic Command. If you're not familiar with U.S. Strategic Command, they are the command that controls nuclear forces for the United States. Strategy planning, detection, and deployment of U.S. nuclear weapons are going to be using DevOps and Agile. I really don't want to hear, we can't do that here anymore. Like, I shouldn't walk into an organization and say, well, DevOps and Agile are great, but we can't do that. The U.S. nuclear weapons program is. Really, what is your excuse, right? Like, the end of the world, potentially, is using DevOps. Like, for real, like, they're calling out OpenShift and Kubernetes and everything else. So we tried to bid on this, and we're still waiting to hear back, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see if I get to work on that, because that'll be fun. If you don't believe me, go to this link. It will take you directly to that slideshow and Word docs and everything else about the call out, and it shows you the architecture they're trying to use. So yeah, I don't want to hear that won't work here. Malarkey. I'll say it, malarkey. I'll say it to a client's face. Malarkey, that won't work here. It should work here, and here's why it's not going to work here. I think we all know why it's not going to work here. It gets told to people. Fear. Humans fear change. Why upset the status quo? Why would we do that? Thucydides calls out specifically, it was the rise of Athens and the fear that instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. At the time, Sparta was obviously, everybody's seen 300 by this point, a really legit fighting force, city-state in the Mediterranean, and Athens was a rising cultural power that looked to policy as opposed to war fighting to build its strength. Sparta didn't like that. They saw trades go poorly as a result of actions Athens had taken, so they decided, preemptively, we'll go to war, just to fight back this rising power. If you don't believe Thucydides, may I introduce you to Jedi Master Yoda. It's a very salient quote, like this is for real. Humans fear change, we know that. We resist change. But fear leads to anger. I've experienced that myself. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Athens and Sparta, because of their war, which went on for decades, both declined. Like a sinking ship, just drowned themselves because one party decided that they shouldn't have their part of the pie. Or a sliver of that part of the pie, I should say. So let's put it in the DevOps context. Fear. It's the rise of something new, DevOps, and the fear it installs, I'm using like sysadmin terms in my talk about war, it's awesome. The fear it instills in people that makes conflict possible. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to start lobbing grenades at your coworkers. I get that. But terse conversations, having to explain yourself, trying to figure out, like, why won't these people just get along with the program and do some new things? Well, it's because they fear change. And you have to acknowledge that. And you have to grapple with that to an extent. So let's look at a specific historical case mentioned in Graham Allison's work, the UK versus the US. What many people don't realize is at the turn of the 20th century, the UK and the US were about to go to war. Again. We had the Revolutionary War, War of 1812. We fought a civil war, and then we were about to go to war with the UK, which at the time was the British Empire, or whatever they called themselves then. But why? Why were they doing this? Same reasons. The United States was undergoing its industrial revolution, and its economic prowess had matched the entire British Empire by 1916 as far as GDP is concerned. The British Prime Minister actually said at the time, a war with America, not this year, but in the not-so-distant future, has become something more than a possibility. That's a politician saying that in Parliament. The First Lord of the Admiralty in 1901, before that, said he would never quarrel with the United States if I could possibly avoid it. Some pretty strong words. However, Teddy Roosevelt was expanding the Navy dramatically. The Monroe Doctrine led to the UK actually having no allies in the Western Hemisphere, so their launching point for war was going to be the British Isles. They kind of went through that before. It didn't work out too well. Ultimately, the UK decided to focus inwardly in Europe because all the cousins, everybody else that was starting, World War I essentially, needed to be dealt with. And that was a more important thing because war was about to be on the UK's doorstep. But, to give you an idea, this is the UK at its territorial peak. The United States outgrew that all economically. Much like China is outgrowing the US economically now, which is the point of Graham Allison's book. The massive empire opted out of global domination, #1 in the world. They opted out of that because they saw more problems at home than a conflict with the US merited. The US was actually being very provocative. I think we all know that President Teddy Roosevelt was a little bit of a brash individual. We were doing things like pirateering in the Caribbean with US Navy ships, but without US flags. You know, fun stuff like that. But because the UK conceded global domination, when World War I came, we were the #1 material supplier until we got involved in the war, and US involvement actually tipped the war to the Allies. It's amazing. And we have forged a friendship that has lasted well over 100 years now. The UK and the US are the most staunchest of allies in the world. Well, how can we better our worlds? DevOps isn't merely automation or tearing down silos. It's about improving business outcomes and our current work environments. You know, no one wants to go to work and toil. That's what DevOps is about. But to some people, DevOps could be literally a war crime. And that's sad, but people have to acknowledge that as we go through these transformations. Think about other people in your organization. Think about people outside of your IT organizations. And then, most importantly, we'll talk about change and failing fast, because that, I think, is one of the most awesome things about DevOps. So DevOps, the war crime. That was the original title of this talk. And I built this talk for ChefConf. And Nathan Harvey, who's in the audience and speaking after me, said, yeah, war crime's a little strong of a title. Well, that's a good point. So DevOps isn't war, and it shouldn't be. But for somebody that's in the silo, that's been doing this thing forever, and is fighting back against change because they fear change, it looks like a war crime to them. What happens to their job? Do they have to relearn everything they've ever learned? And one person told me during a DevOps transformation, one of my previous employers, should I just retire now? He was 5, 10 years away from retirement, and he was asking me, should I just retire now? Are my skills still worth being here in this office? Yes. You mangle all the metrics so that it makes sense for me to find something to work on. You are one of the most valuable players in all of this. But he didn't feel validated in that. So I told him, you're one of the most valuable people. I made a concession. He made a concession because he stayed. We got along just fine after that. Empathy is very important in DevOps. We get that. This isn't an empathy talk. I feel like there was a time in DevOps, hey, look, notifications, yay. Someone's editing one of the docs I wrote, yay. The point of DevOps is to help people change and get better outcomes from businesses, right? Like, who here collects a paycheck? Most of us in the room. Who here likes getting that paycheck and not being out on the street? Probably most of us in this room. Not that there's anything wrong with living on the street, but I doubt you would be here if you were. That paycheck is a result of business decisions. We're part of that decision-making process in DevOps. We need to make people feel comfortable, create that psychological safety, even through these changes. DevOps is not war, and neither is it a war crime. What about your networking team? Great, everybody's going to a cloud or the private cloud. You're building your own cloud. What happens when you actually need networking? You run out of ports on a switch. Well, you call somebody that knows how to configure a network switch, because who in the room is actually a network administrator these days? Like, that's their sole job. No, one person, sorry. That's not your sole job? Okay. Well, everybody does a little bit of networking whether they realize it or not. But what are network engineers really awesome at? VLAN, subnets, NAT, VPN. The list goes on and on. BGP, all these things that power the internet. Oh, and they power VPCs too. Bring them along on your journey. Teach them. Automation makes them more productive. I can't tell you, I used to be a network engineer. I can't tell you how many times I wanted something to version control my Cisco network configs that didn't cost millions of dollars a year. When I was doing this at the turn of the century, there was nothing. We were literally copy and pasting things out of hyperterminal, because we were on Windows machines, into text files on Windows share drives. That was our network backup. Imagine if the network folks could automate that and iterate as fast as your development teams. They can add new features, build new subnets, add new switching. Boom, automation, done. There's tons of tools that can automate network gear nowadays. What about your security organization? Gordon Half, opensource.com, he wrote a very, very poignant piece about how DevSecOps is a necessary term. I know dev something ops or something DevOps has been kind of overplayed in this industry, but DevSecOps is actually a very poignant term. Shifting left is about putting security closer and closer to developers' keyboards so that you don't run into a vulnerability in production. So that you don't run into a vulnerability in production should be what we're all about here. We don't like failure. So it's easier to catch something early and fix it than it is to catch something in production and fix it. But you notice some repeating themes here. Your security team is sitting there saying, what do I do? If you're putting all the security tooling in your pipeline, what do I do? Who's going to build the tooling? I don't know how to run Burp Suite or Nessus or anything like that. Security team does, though. I can tell you how to hook it in to the pipeline, but I don't know how to configure it after the fact. Actually, I do, but most people don't. But I mean, I haven't worked with these tools in a long time either. Directly, day to day, that's it. Those people, those security teams in your organizations have the skills. Use them. Bring them with you. And remember, DevOps isn't just for IT. You can have other allies in your organization helping you with your DevOps transformation. Work with HR to find good candidates. Work with your C-suite to say, this is why we want to do DevOps. Your marketing teams can help you set up your own DevOps days internally and make them really fantastic events. Even finance can help. Obviously, DevOps takes money. Working with your finance team on your AWS build, sharing a common language between the two organizations, like Seth talked about yesterday, very important. Everyone can be helpful in tearing down walls in your organization. Walls of confusion, though, are the worst walls to have. Let's tear them down. If you've heard me talk before, failing fast and change are like two of my most heartfelt things. Humans resist change, right? So if you create a psychologically safe environment where change and failure is okay, you ease that fear. We inherently value success more than failure. There's actually a good story. John Willis talks about this quite a bit. The andon cord, Toyota Kata andon cord. Anybody heard about that? So, for you not familiar, Toyota assembly line, anybody in the line can push a button, pull a cord, they call it the andon cord, stop the whole assembly line because of an error or quality problem at their station. Something like 1,000 times a day, this andon cord was getting pulled. And Toyota tells you, how do you build the most cars in the world? How are you the world's #1 auto manufacturer? Well, we pull the andon cord 1,000 times a day. That teaches them problems at the first possible sign and how to fix them. They learn so much every day about their manufacturing process and how to fix it that they don't fail too often. Their suppliers can fail, their airbag company, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, failing fast and fixing it right then is a lot easier and creates higher quality code, products, anything, than waiting until it's out in production to fix. Different is not always bad. That's a different way of thinking. Safety 1 versus safety 2, look up Sidney Decker's work for more info on that. Different ways of thinking is actually good for DevOps because you wouldn't need to transform at this point in your organization's journey if it weren't because some competition was rising. Throwing good money after bad might be a term, don't boil the ocean, things like that might be terms that you've heard repeatedly. But it's easier to figure out a dud early than dumping millions of dollars into a failure. One company in Detroit spent 6 years and millions of dollars and hundreds of people's time on a massive project to create some new technological achievement, and they just closed it down, no output from that project, and said, we're done. We're not going to waste more time on whatever it is we thought we were going to build 6 years ago and still haven't yet. Completely reorganized their technology organization. Now they're embracing DevOps. Imagine if they pulled the and-on cord at year one, how much money, time, effort, and energy they would have saved. So they won't let me talk forever, although I probably could, at least until I died, or was very thirsty like I am right now. It's human nature to battle things we fear. Finding allies and creating successes together is key. Think of the UK and the US in World War I. The UK decided to make an ally, found an ally in World War I, and look at the friendship we have achieved together for hundreds of years, or over 100 years. Early inclusion and successes are keys to concessions are keys to success. Share those successes, celebrate the successes. You and your security team just put some security tooling into your pipeline. Seriously throw a party that Friday. Do it. Everybody will feel better about it. Fail quickly. Create the safe environment to fail. Look at failure as learning opportunities. Don't look at it as a failure to succeed. Look at it as opportunity to learn. Andrew Clay Schaefer said it best. You're either part of a learning organization or you're losing to one that is. I like this quote. Now, I really hate kind of the gender specificity of it these days, but I must study politics and war so that my sons have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. I always forget the last word. But think about that. You must study Agile and Lean, Safety 2, all of these things, so that the people that come after you can worry about the next thing that challenges your organization. I'm Chris Short, I work with SJ Technologies. Thank you very much for your time today.
So, what's the first thing they say when the manager comes down the line after they pull the and-on cord?
Thank you.
Thank you. So it's not just, I pulled the cord, oh crap, it's thank you for trying to inject quality into the system. Even if you think something's wrong and it's not really, they want you to pull the cord. You're not supposed to triple check it. So it's important to reinforce that. We got questions for Chris? Anybody?
Wow. That's a first.
Nah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Got one in the back. Nah. Yep, we'll take it.
I like affirmation. After what Chris said about before my talk,
Yeah,
I could use a little confidence boost right now.
as a form of affirmation, I was in a relatively agile-ish organization 2 jobs ago. We actually celebrated failure. We would pull fails out. People would bow, and everybody would acknowledge, and then we would ask, okay, what did we learn from that? And we would move on, and that was it.
That's the Toyota kind of way. Like blameless culture, I think, is very important. I've heard in a couple of open spaces people saying, like, call people out about this. I haven't said anything. The reason why is because I'm up here on stage today, and now I can. Do not blame people for failing. Blame the system that allowed them to fail. That is the most important thing. If you have a system that allows for failure and it causes a problem, that is a failure in the system, not a failure in the person, to recognize that.
Absolutely. That's the third way of DevOps, is that connection between failure and learning. If you're celebrating failure but not embracing that learning aspect, you might be doing it wrong.
So what's your go-to list of reasons why someone shouldn't retire? You know, like
Reasons why they should retire?
No, should not retire.
Should not retire.
I've got.
Okay, I was about to say, whoa!
Yeah.
So they have provided value for a significant amount of time. You know, the gentleman that was actually asking me if he should retire, he had been at the company exactly 2 months longer than I had. 2 months. The thing that I always took back to him was, you know, hey, you provide interesting metrics and you point out things that we need to fix. You have to use specific examples in the work that they're doing. If you do a value stream map and you realize that this person's work is not valuable to the end goal, find something that their skills can align with that is. But staying on board, you know, they were producing an output before. That output is probably still important somehow, hopefully. If it's not, well, that's a different problem. But use that output in your pipeline, in your transformation. That's the key thing. It's very personal. It's not like I have a go-to list of things. I need you on this team. I want you on that wall kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I hope I get to retire someday, right? Like,
Someday.
that is a valid option. Like if someone's at a point where they're like, I've been in the industry a really long time and I've done all right, and I'm not sure I want to go around the mulberry bush one more time, I can respect that, but I want to try to find a place for them in the org. But that's a personal decision. I support their decision to retire if they're like, I don't have the gas for this. I'm ready to go hang out with other people, not at work. So, awesome talk, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for playing. Let's hear it for Chris one more time.